It is a profound and unrelenting pain to lose someone you love, but to lose them in a way that leaves questions unanswered, who, why, and how compounds that grief into something unimaginable. The absence of closure becomes its own torment, a shadow that lingers over every memory, every shared moment that once brought joy. When someone is taken from this world by an act of violence, the natural order is shattered. Those left behind are not just grieving, they are trapped in a limbo of disbelief, anger, and an insatiable need for justice. For families living with this kind of loss, the question can feel like an unending storm. It haunts the quiet hours of the night, interrupts the fragile moments of peace, and settles heavily into the spaces where laughter used to live. Every day is a struggle against the tide of uncertainty, the what-ifs and the whys that echo in the void left by a life stolen too soon. How do you say goodbye to someone when the story of their final chapter remains unwritten? But the impact goes beyond the individual family. It touches communities, erodes trust, and leaves an invisible scar on the collective conscience. Every missing answer becomes a reminder of human vulnerability, of the fragility of life, and of the unfinished business of holding perpetrators accountable. Yet even in the midst of this profound pain, there is strength. There is hope, however distant, that one day the truth will emerge, bringing the light of justice to those who have lived too long in the darkness. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
We would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have cared for this land for tens of thousands of years. Their connection to country ensures that we can continue to appreciate its beauty and significance today. We honour the wisdom and stories shared by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and recognise the responsibility to preserve and celebrate this legacy. This podcast is recorded on Wonnarua land, and we extend our respect to elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge the lands you are listening from today, as well as the country of the Dharawal people where today's story takes place. The Royal National Park holds an extremely rich Aboriginal history, showcasing stunning rock art that we encourage you to see and learn about for yourself. Finally, we express our gratitude to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening today. Thank you for continuing to share your culture, your knowledge, and your connection to this land.
Somebody told me that my uncle had been killed and his head was cut off. And I'm terrified in this house, thinking, are these people going to come here and are they going to break in and kill us? That was my thought. That's a vital piece of evidence and it's missing. He has said, I never know when I say hello to someone if I'm shaking hands with someone who may have killed my father.
Today's conversation includes acts of horrific violence and the impact of unsolved crime. This is not an episode for listening with little kids around, and if it's not one you're feeling up for, thanks for dropping in and we'll see you next time. Today we are headed to Sydney's heritage-listed Royal National Park. Known to locals as the Nasho or the Royal, the 16,000-hectare Royal National Park is located near Cronulla, within an hour's drive from both the Sydney CBD and Wollongong. The Royal National Park was established in 1879 and is the world's second oldest national park, losing the top spot to Yellowstone, which was established in 1872. It features unique heritage attractions along with fascinating plants, wildflowers, birds and animals, perfect for bushwalking, cycling, surfing, picnicking or whale watching. This diverse park offers everything from beaches to rainforests, with some of the highlights including the stunning figure 8 pools, which are naturally formed rock pools shaped like a perfect figure 8, located along the coastal rock shelf near Burning Palms Beach. They require a scenic hike and exceptionally carefully timing with tides for safe access. If you intend to visit the pools, please check the National Park's website as they provide a risk forecast so you can plan and time your visit safely. The striking Wedding Cake Rock is a stark white sandstone formation that resembles a slice of cake and offers breathtaking views of the ocean. It's a favourite for photography enthusiasts, though access to the rock itself is restricted due to safety regulations. The coastal walk, stretching 26 kilometres from Bundeena to Otford, offers dramatic coastal cliffs, secluded beaches and lush bushland. It's a showcase of the park's diverse landscapes, perfect for both day hikes and multi-day treks. Guatemala is the convergence of a picturesque lagoon, waterfall and beach, making it an idyllic spot for picnicking, swimming, snorkelling and relaxing. It's a family-friendly destination that encapsulates the park's serene beauty. Palm Jungle Loop Track is a lush trail weaving through the dense rainforest, offering an immersive experience in the park's subtropical environment. It's a shorter but equally rewarding alternative to the longer coastal walk. Audley is the historic heart of the park and is home to picnic grounds, heritage-listed buildings and boat rentals for exploring the Hacking River. Its visitors centre is a great starting point for learning all about the park. Gerry Beach is a favourite among surfers. This expansive beach is surrounded by rugged cliffs and rolling hills and is also an excellent spot for whale watching during migration seasons. Perched high above the coastline, Governor Game Lookout is on the southeast edge of the park. It provides panoramic views of the ocean and rugged cliffs. It's an ideal spot for whale watching during migration season and for soaking in the park's coastal beauty. Easily accessible by car, it's a must-visit for those seeking breathtaking vistas and a favourite stop-off point for many travelling between Sydney and Wollongong. And it was exactly that for a gentleman named Nigel McAree. And it would be the last view he took in before his horrific murder on the 17th of September 1975. However, Nigel's body is not the only one to be found within the park. In very recent history, Matthew Levison's body was discovered in 2017 when his ex-partner, who had been charged with Matthew's 2007 murder but was found not guilty by a jury, led police to the area where his remains were later discovered after agreeing to an immunity deal where he was protected from being charged with perjury. Police searched Royal National Park during the 2024 investigation into the murders of Jesse Baird and Luke Davis by Police Officer Senior Constable Beau Lemaire Condon, specifically near Sir Bertram Stevens Drive and Bunandine Drive. However, Jesse and Luke's bodies were later found inside surfboard bags at Bungonia. The senior constable is being held on remand until his trial, which has had many delays, including his barrister stepping away from the case, applications for legal aid, and a civil suit initiated by the accused against New South Wales Police. A case conference is scheduled for early February this year. In 2018, a bushwalker stopped to take a break in the park and spotted a checkered plastic bag in a remote area at the bottom of a cliff. After some investigation, he found the bag contained bones. The homicide squad investigated and forensic anthropologists determined that the bones belonged to a male, about 175 centimetres tall, and was aged between 25 and 40 when he died. Carbon dating test established the male had died somewhere between 1985 and 2005. DNA phenotyping was then used to narrow the pool of victims and suggested the deceased was of Asian descent with brown eyes, black hair, and were able to take a possible list of 565 matches from the missing persons registry and narrow them down to 20 or 30. In July 2023, a body was discovered inside a burning car at Waterfall Flat Car Park inside of the National Park. Police also discovered another body in a burning vehicle in North Parramatta 2 hours later. The body within the park was later identified and further investigation found that the two incidents were not linked. In April 2019, a man's body was discovered by a bushwalker wedged in rocks along the coastline of the park. An investigation revealed that the body belonged to that of a 22-year-old Nepalese student who had been washed off the rocks while swimming at the Figure 8 pools 2 months prior. At the time of his disappearance, the National Park risk warning for the pools had been extreme. It was the 9th drowning in the park since 2016. For many of the families of these individuals who have faced the grief and trauma of losing someone they love, the answers that come during the most tragic of circumstances provide, at the very least, an understanding of how and why these tragedies occurred. But for the family and friends of Nigel McAree, their lives are still filled with questions that exist alongside the grief of missing the husband, father, uncle and friend that they loved, and the horror of knowing the brutality he endured in the final moments of his life. They have never received any answers. Nigel's murder investigation remains unsolved. This year will mark the 50th anniversary of Nigel's death. 50 years is more than a lifetime for some, and the people who loved him have spent that time hoping and waiting for the answers that they deserve. On the afternoon of September 17th, 1975, James and Karen Millay pulled into the Governor Game Lookout in Royal National Park, looking forward to checking out the views towards the coastline. As they pulled in, they noticed a gold-coloured Ford Fairlane. Not giving it much thought at the time, just assuming that the car's occupant had headed off for a walk around the area. But as they passed by, James noticed what appeared to be a pool of blood on the ground near some bushes not far from the car. Thinking that the car's occupant may possibly have been injured, they decided to head off in search of a park ranger, who they found, and he took a report from the couple and immediately headed out to the lookout to investigate. It didn't take the ranger long to discover, lying in some bushes not far from the lookout's edge, was the body of a man, lying face down, in suit pants, a business shirt and dress shoes. There was no question that the man was deceased, as even from a distance the ranger could clearly see a giant pool of blood in the space where the man's head should have been. Immediately realising the man had been decapitated, the ranger made calls to police requesting the assistance of the homicide squad based at nearby Sutherland. On arrival, the police shut down the area and roadways to and from the lookout and began searching for evidence, as well as the victim's missing head. Obviously, searching over the side of a lookout with a steep drop-off is not the easiest of challenges, but despite the dangerous terrain, they located the victim's head about 15 feet from his body. On inspection, it was apparent that the man had received a gunshot wound to the back of his skull prior to being decapitated, which investigators found unusual. Given that a close-range gunshot wound would have killed the man, why would someone then remove his head from his body? Investigators established from blood splatter at the scene that the man was likely shot in the back of the head while he was leaning on the railing looking out at the view. His body was then dragged to nearby bushes before the attacker or attackers cut off his head and then pushed his body and head off the top of the lookout. The gold Fairlane was unlocked and a suit jacket matching the man's pants was found inside. Nothing had been disturbed inside the car. The only things that seemed to be missing were the man's car keys and wallet, but his wallet was later found at the scene, which ruled out a motive of robbery, and the brutality of this killing gave the officers the initial impression that it seemed personal, or worse, that it was a thrill kill. So it would seem they would have to identify the man to establish what could be a possible motive. That, though, would not take long, as one of the responding officers at the scene recognised the victim. Kathleen was just 15 when she met a dashing young fitter and turner, Nigel McAree, through some mutual friends when they were attending a Scottish dance. Nigel insisted on driving Kathleen home that evening. On their next date, when he took her to the pictures, he told her, "I'm going to marry you." And he was right. 3 years later, in 1956, they were married. It took 9 years, but their family became 3 when they welcomed a baby boy, Stuart. Kathleen describes Nigel as a pure and simple family man. Family was everything to him, and where he went, we went, Kathleen has said. Nigel, the son of Scottish immigrants, had a passion for the bagpipes. He had been playing them since he was 10 years old, and when the Police Boys Club opened in Sutherland, he saw a chance to pass on his passion to others. Nigel was a very community-minded man. He loved children and he seized the opportunity at a chance to bring kids in off the streets. When he wasn't engaged in teaching the kids the pipes or practice for the Police Boys Band, he was helping out in other volunteer roles within the Police Boys Club, often including his son Stuart, who was also involved in the band and playing the drums. They also enjoyed camping and hunting trips together where Nigel would share with Stuart his love of wildflowers. It was another of his passions, and he would always carry with him a book of wildflowers, often pulling into spots to see what species he could find and identify. Governor Game Lookout was one of Nigel's favourite places, especially after leaving his trade to become a travelling salesman for the Formica Plastics Company, often travelling between Sydney and Wollongong. It was one of his favourite stop-offs to take a break. For Kathleen, that day started like any other. She took her husband breakfast in bed, and they got ready for their day. Nigel dropping Stuart to school and Kathleen to work in Sutherland, where he said he would pick her up again later that afternoon. But Nigel never came. Kathleen headed home thinking he'd been held up at work, but when he did not return by dinner time, her concern grew. Then a knock came at the door. It was the police, and what follows is every family's worst nightmare. Today we welcome Nigel and Kathleen's niece, Narelle Spencer, to the studio, who is joining us from her home via phone. Narelle has played a pivotal role on behalf of her family in attempting to seek answers when police investigation and leads have gone cold. I reached out to Narelle in the hope to fact-check some of the information about the investigation during my research into Nigel's death, and her passion and desire to find answers, especially for Kathleen, was so evident that I asked if she would possibly be interested in sharing Nigel's story herself. Narelle, Stuart and Kathleen are just some of the many thousands of people in Australia who are family members of victims of unsolved crimes and people on the missing persons register. We both agreed that honouring Nigel and keeping his story in the public eye is important, but so is acknowledging the family members who are out there waiting and hoping for answers. Hi Narelle, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shannon. Thank you on behalf of my family and Nigel's friends for putting a light back onto Nigel's case after all this time.
It's my greatest pleasure to be able to do that, and I'm so grateful that you have agreed to join us and share parts of this story. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool for people to be able to hear this from someone who not only loved him but has been connected to his family since the time of his death. So I'm hoping that after our short conversation and what I got from you, that our listeners will see how passionate you are and how dearly loved he was.
Yeah, I really hope so, because he was a family man. He was a lot of people's friend, and he actually was a very good person. He was very giving to the community. So I'll explain that further as we go along, if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great. Would you like to share with us some of your early memories of Nigel?
Sure. So Nigel, as you know, and as most people may know, was involved in the Sutherland Police Citizens Pipe Band, and we used to go away. He was my auntie Kathy, and my mother grew up in the same house as sisters. They were cousins, but they were raised as sisters. So therefore she was my auntie, he was my uncle. And we used to go away, and Nigel and Kathy and Stuart and everybody would go away to band competitions, and we also looked forward with great joy to the band dances. So they were on every couple of months, and they actually had another band playing. My stepfather sang, and then the band would come on and they would do all of their practice numbers and their numbers that they did in competitions. And it was really, really a wonderful time in our life. It was so much fun. And Nigel and Kathy had a lovely house down on the Warrenoy River, right near Warrenoy River, and they had the best parties, the really best parties that you could ever have. And one of my favourite things I remember about Nigel, when we walked into their foyer, he had a very big passion for tropical fish, and they had the most beautiful, beautiful fish tank that was along one wall. And this was the days before fish tanks were very expensive and like a luxury item. And he loved these fish, and he just had these gorgeous tropical fish in there. And he was really good at keeping them. And the other thing about Nigel was he was a lawn Nazi. So he had a front lawn that looked like a bowling green. It was
I
so
am married to a
beautiful.
lawn Nazi, so I know exactly what those men are like. Yes.
I remember getting in a lot of trouble because Stuart and I would run over the front lawn and he'd go, "Get off that lawn, you two." And they had a swimming pool when people didn't have pools in their backyard, a built-in pool. So he'd worked really hard to have this idyllic life for his family, his little family of him and Kathy and Stuart. And his extended family, us as well. We used to all go down there and have wonderful, wonderful times down there. I remember that house very fondly.
It sounds like he was exceptionally good at cultivating memories for the people that he loved.
Yes, that's true.
You and Stuart are of similar age?
When Nigel was murdered, Stuart was 11 years old and I was 12 years old. We had grown up together anyway, all of our lives. Stuart's grandmother and my grandfather were brother and sister. So therein lies the relationship. And as I said, Kathy was brought up in the house with my mum as
Yep.
part of the family. So like sisters.
It's not unusual at that time. I've got a few family members who grew up in very similar circumstances, and it does really add to that feeling of extended family and the closeness
Yes.
and bonds that are formed.
Exactly. And it was like that. Our family is still very much like that. And it was definitely like that. We had a lovely, lovely family dynamic.
So I can imagine that once Nigel's murder occurred, that being such a close-knit family that cared so deeply about each other, this was something that rocked all of you, not just Kathleen and Stuart, but the extended family as well as your local community.
Everybody was in shock. Our family really couldn't put it together. We couldn't understand. It was such a shock for our family. To put it in context, so my stepfather was in the pipe band as well. That's how Kathy played matchmaker with my mum and him.
Oh.
And he was waiting at the band club and came home to our house and said, Nigel didn't turn up to band practice. And this was about 8 o'clock. So they called band practice, sort of cut it short and all went home because he was the pipe major. So he was a big part of obviously the band practice. And it happened every whatever night it was. I think it was a Wednesday night. And it happened every week and he didn't come. And then we started getting lots and lots of phone calls. And at my age at 12, I sort of didn't really understand what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the next minute, my stepfather left and he came back with Stuart. And I didn't really understand why Stuart was at our place. And then my mum said, "Oh, Nigel has died." And then I went to school, I think, the next day. Stuart went back home and I went to school the next day. And somebody told me that my uncle had been killed and his head was cut off. And I said, "No, that's not true." I didn't believe it. I thought it was, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. And I thought that can't be true. And I went home and I told my mum and she said, "Yes, that is true." We have been told so many different things over the years.
Yeah.
And one of the early things that we heard was that when Nigel was in the park, he had been shot, obviously dragged just down to, there's a ledge just below the lookout.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that, well, one of the first things they told us was it seemed like someone was trying to recover the bullet. Then later theories said, no, just think it was someone who didn't realise that dismembering someone was not an easy task, because that was one theory, because he had more mutilations than just his head being cut off.
Right.
And it was very, very violent and very, very sick with what was done to him. And no one could understand why. There was lots of theories. There was so many theories thrown out at us. There was the fact that there could be a hermit in the park. He had been seen carrying a machete before. He may have done it,
Mm-hmm.
but he'd never been seen with a gun, so that sort of didn't make sense. Then there was stories about a group of young teenagers who, may have taken part in a thrill kill because they'd been seen mucking up in the park and they were high on drugs and they had guns and knives and things like that.
Yep.
Then there was also the theory that it could have been a hit, a mafia hit. We even heard that at one point. And we don't even know where it come from because he's obviously not involved in drugs, not involved in anything like that.
He's not a man running an organised crime syndicate.
No, he was a salesman, so he would have been good going, and he just didn't have spare money, as Kathleen said, to have been anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And another one was that it could have been a jealous lover. There was lots of theories thrown out, and we were told that he had been shot, dragged off the cliff. His head had been cut off. They had tried to push his body over the cliff, but it got caught, so it did not go down. If it had have gone down, they would have had a lot of trouble to recover that body, and that his head had been placed on a bush. Now, I don't know if that's true or not true because I've never, ever seen the police report.
So that leads me to another question. And I know that you were quite young at the time, but I wonder if maybe some of the adult family members had talked about it. How did the police deliver this information to the families? Like, do you receive police reports, or is there a case manager that's coming back and liaising with you guys over the things that they're finding during this initial investigation?
We never heard from the police ever. Initially, all of our family was interviewed, as well as all Nigel's friends, people from the band, neighbours, past neighbours. Everybody was interviewed, and then we never heard from the police at all. We heard from the police when they decided to reopen Nigel's case as a cold case, and that was the first time we'd heard from them.
And how many years after was the cold case reopened?
Early 2000s.
Okay.
So we hadn't heard from the police in any time between then and the cold case unit contacting. And they actually contacted my mum.
Right.
They had her name, and my mother and I went round with Kathleen and we gave them all the information we had and that we had been told and that we knew. And we were told at that time we had really great young police officer who was so keen. Unfortunately, he got a promotion and moved on, and he told us it was a very solvable case, they felt, and that Nigel's case had been picked to be worked on because they believed it was such a solvable case.
When the cold case team took it over, did they present you with further leads?
Not really. Not really. They said that they had some directions that they were looking into.
Yeah.
There was a mention to me at one stage about police doing phone taps on certain individuals' phones and going out, interviewing people and seeing what came back if they rang each other after they were interviewed by the police again.
So they definitely had some suspects.
Definitely had some suspects.
And do you think that occurred after the anonymous Crime Stoppers call?
The Crime Stoppers call, the anonymous one, came before the 2000s.
Right.
And whoever rang from Victoria, a Victorian line, we know that. Maybe they were on holidays in Victoria, who knows?
That's right.
But we know they rang from Victoria, and they actually gave police some very pertinent information, and they also talked about stuff that had not been released.
So I know that when that call came in, that person had said that they had an affiliation with 3 specific people and named those 3 people. And
Correct.
That he was sort of part of their group when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
And that those people, once they were investigated at that later time, it was discovered that they did have quite significant criminal records.
Yes, and that's yeah, I've heard that also, and I believe that's the people the police definitely thought were a possibility of doing this.
It sounds like that they had a lot of reports at the time during the initial investigation that these young people, and we can't be sure if it's the three that were named, but there was definitely a group of young people in 1975 that were causing quite a lot of havoc within the park. And there was reports of girls being held up at knife point and young people in school uniforms carrying guns. It sounded like they had a bit of a reign of terror. And do you think that this is where the idea of possibly it just being a thrill kill originally came from?
I would say so. I
Yeah.
would say so. And the unsophisticated way that things happened. I mean, they were very lucky they weren't caught at the time, but they would have probably had to have murdered more people because, unfortunately, I don't know whether you know this or not, but the young couple who originally pulled up to stop at Governor Game Lookout, Nigel's cigarette was on the ground. Nigel was a smoker and it was still burning. And so had they have decided to go and look over the edge, they could have been met with the same fate. Fortunately, they've driven off to get the ranger, and that's probably what saved their life.
So it's very likely that that person was in the very close vicinity when those people pulled up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Very close proximity. And apparently that day in the park, and they know this from records because when you went into Nasho in any time, you used to have to get a ticket for your car unless you said, we're passing through. And
so
if
like you paid for entry into the national park.
Yeah, you paid for entry into the park. You got a ticket that you put on your dashboard, and that if you pulled over anywhere, the rangers would come along, they'd look at the tickets, and yeah, you were fine to stay. If you didn't have a ticket on your car, you would have been fined. So we know for a fact that day there were tons of people in the park.
Yeah.
It was very busy in the park that day.
And all of those people who had paid, and obviously they take your registration details, those people were able to be tracked down and questioned.
I have no idea. See, we've never been given any information. We've not been given any information as to what was actually done. Honestly, when Justine's book came out, she gave us more information in her book than what we ever knew.
Because she had worked obviously closely with the officer that was in charge of the cold case. Yeah.
Correct.
So that's where I did get that information from, was Justine's book, that they did ask people to come back and they re-questioned people about things that they'd seen. And that's where they found out that there had been the report of the vagrant man with a knife. And I'm not sure if that was on the exact day.
And a robbery on that day.
Which they did tie to that same man.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And I think it came out that he was a heroin addict, but they ruled him out quite early in the investigation.
They did. And the other thing was there was a lot of vagrants living in the park at that time. These days they were called vagrants and they were called hermits. These days we would call them homeless people who went and lived in the shacks at Burning Palms and all that place. And so there was quite a few homeless people living in the park in those days. And there are caves in the park apparently where they lived as well. And so all of those people were questioned also. But I just don't see what homeless people or a heroin addict. Nigel's wallet was there with money in it. He had a very expensive watch on. He had a scope that was a gun scope, but he was looking down the hill with the gun scope because that was in the car. Those things were worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars back in those days. So I can't understand why, if someone was wanting money, that it was definitely not a robbery.
No, because the only thing that they took were his car keys.
Correct. And they didn't steal the car.
They didn't steal the car, which was obviously the most valuable possession that was there.
Unless, this is one of my personal theories, unless they sort of weren't planning on getting disturbed and then were going to take the car after they'd done what they wanted to do with the body.
Right. Yes. Prior to you mentioning it, I knew nothing about Nigel's cigarette still burning. I didn't realise that the time frame between when those people pulled up and when... Yeah,
we'd been told that quite early, and we had people from the Police Boys Club who knew Nigel very well who said those people were very, very lucky, we think. Very lucky.
I want to take you back because I've heard you speak about in Justine's book, or read the
Mhm.
words about how concerning it was for you guys that these people had the keys to Nigel's home.
The first few nights we were in, I didn't even know they had the keys. So as soon as we found out they had the keys, we had to, in the old days, book a locksmith. And we were very fortunate that a locksmith came straight away and changed all the locks. But I can tell you, I went down there on the first New Year's Eve because we always had the New Year's Eve parties, and we had a few people around, and I stayed over that night. And it was terrifying there. My whole night I was sort of awake, and all I could think of was, how can they live here? And I was a little girl, remember, 12 years old.
Yeah.
This is New Year's Eve, and I'm terrified in this house, thinking, are these people going to come here, and are they going to, break in and kill us? That was my thought. And I don't know how that they survived there. I mean, you must understand, at this point, my Auntie Kathy was still very much under doctor care.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother had moved in. My Auntie Beryl had moved in there to help her with Stuart and to help her with just basically living. She could not return to work. She could not speak. When I say she couldn't speak, if she tried to get words out, she had the most dreadful stutter that had never been evident in her life. And she couldn't speak.
She was so traumatized.
Traumatized, very traumatized.
Yeah.
Very traumatized.
And I imagine that
just
some of the fears
horrendous.
you had, Stuart would have been carrying as well, even though he didn't speak about them.
Stuart never spoke about them. And from the minute his dad was killed, this is a horrible thing, people would no longer let their children come and play with him, because they obviously had fears also, because no one knew why Nigel had been murdered. So because no one knew why, they assumed there had to be something terrible that had caused Nigel to be murdered. So therefore, by association, didn't want any kids to play with Stuart.
That must have been so hard on him.
It was awful. He had one friend, and every weekend I got taken down there and we'd go out on the Wani in his boat fishing or something to try and do something.
Get him out of the house and do normal kid things.
That's right. That's right. And so it became very difficult for him, very, very difficult.
I imagine you, being the older cousin, had a strong sense of wanting to protect him as well.
I did, but he also he had a very rebellious time. He was angry. It was hard. He would do naughty stuff too. Like, it would be a terror, a holy terror of the Warrenora, because he was like rebelling. He didn't know how to act out any of this stuff.
And I think any psychologist now would tell you that after a huge amount of trauma, that is a very natural response from a young person, especially a male.
Yes, and I was always really scared because I was going to go, you're going to get us into trouble. You're going to get us into trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of boys who didn't experience half of what Stuart did that were making some pretty crazy decisions during that period of their lives as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of your listeners can identify. In those days, adults would just come out and yell at you, tell you, I'm going to go and tell your parents this. So,
the world was a different place, really. Like, communities did raise kids back in those days.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And everybody knew him, obviously. So it was very evident when he was doing naughty stuff in the boat or anything like that, we were going to get in trouble. So,
someone was going to tell on him, yeah.
Exactly. We did have fun, though.
Yeah.
We did have a lot of fun. And I'm really glad I got to spend so much time with him. So, it wasn't all bad. We're still very close as cousins.
That's lovely.
We live a long way apart, but we're still very close, so.
Yeah, you've played a very big role in all of their lives.
Well, for us, it's just the norm of how our family is.
Yep.
I guess that's probably, like our family is like that. So it's just for us, that's a normal way that we act, I guess.
So back in those early days, I know that Kathleen had some pretty specific thoughts about what she thought may have occurred based around some things that were happening during that time with some corrupt police. I know that you don't necessarily share those views,
yeah.
but there was, it did seem like a link at the time. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, so at the time, if anybody has watched the television series Underbelly, you'll know about a lot of the corrupt police back in those days. Well, one of those corrupt police was Angus MacDonald, and he was actually the first person that interviewed Kathleen and interviewed her for a really long time. Now, at the Police Boys Club, there were a lot of theories back in those days that drugs were coming in and going out through the Police Boys Club. I don't know if that's true, not true, and that was a community thing, not a necessarily us thing. Now, at one point, Nigel and Stuart used to be up there a lot because he would clean the place and do repairs and things like that on the Police Citizens Boys Club because it was all charity run and things like that. And so they were there quite a few times every week. And at one point, I know that under the stage, they found guns in the Police Boys Club.
Which
hidden.
is unusual considering it's a place where children are invited.
Where kids are.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think Nigel took those out of there. And in those days, you didn't need gun licenses or anything else.
No.
So he wouldn't have known, and he obviously had no idea about anything of modern law, ballistics, things like that. So he, I think, took those guns out of there, and I honestly don't know what happened to the guns. We've been asked about that, and I don't know what happened to the guns. Kathleen didn't know, couldn't remember, and so Stuart couldn't remember either because he was only little. But he does remember the fact that they found guns there. My aunt went with Kathleen because Kathleen could barely put a sentence together and say who she was, let alone answer questions. And she was questioned quite aggressively, I believe, by Angus MacDonald for about 4 hours. And in the end, my auntie, she said she thought Kathy was going to collapse. And she said, this is stopping. It's over. We're done.
And I know that Angus MacDonald was eventually implicated in the shooting of another police officer.
Yes. Yes. So, and a lot of those policemen were based around the Sutherland Shire. And there were really good cops. I shouldn't say, because we've always had the very strong view. There are some really wonderful police too in saying that, who were very kind, and they were people that were, had stuff to do with the Police Boys Club, who were very kind to Kathleen and Stuart, and, who got a plaque dedicated to Nigel there for all his hard work up there and things like that, and, awards within the community to him for his work there.
Yeah, I think it goes in any area of community. There's always really wonderful people, and it only takes one or two bad people that tarnish the reputation. So I completely understand that you are not using that one person as a reflection on all the police that you had contact with at the time.
And so getting back to your actual question, so Kathleen then thought, wow, has he seen something he shouldn't have at the Police Boys Club and been murdered because of it? And then compounding that, she went to a psychic, and the psychic told her that she could see police boots all around his body. She said, I'm looking down and I'm seeing police boots. And so Kathleen then was very scared because she was thinking, oh my gosh, is it a policeman who's I'll never know if they come here and if they've done it, if he saw something he shouldn't have. I mean, there's so many what ifs.
So many what ifs. And she hadn't been offered any other alternative at the time.
No.
She was just trying to make sense of something based on the very little information that she had.
Correct. And answers. Like, you have this husband, and for her, he came home every day. He had dinner. They had dinner together. She actually spoiled him completely and got him breakfast in bed every day. And they had this routine. And so Stuart would go with him to the police boys club. He'd come home. He'd pick her up from work because she didn't drive. And so for her, this was the norm of life. They'd never really been apart. They went on holidays together. They did everything together as a family.
When the reports came forward that Nigel had been spotted with another person within the park, I imagine that would have been pretty horrific for Kathleen as well.
Actually, that was devastating to Kathleen. But I must tell you, we had been given a different story for the whole time. We didn't know about the Lisa or anything like that until Justine's book. And I had to go round because I'm the one who said, let's do Justine's book, because the more people that know about it, the more people that might talk.
Mm-hmm.
You never know. And I had to go and tell her that. And
so she
I
didn't
remember going
know
round
until
there.
all those years later.
No, because you know what she had been told? And when we told the police this, I said to my mum after we left, I said, he was looking at us so strangely when we were recounting what we knew. It was like he thought we were lying.
Because there was a big thing of misinformation there in those early days, which made it hard for them to track down his movements on that day.
It was a big misinformation to us. So what Kathleen had been told was that he had been sent by the secretary of Formica down to Wollongong on the wrong day and didn't get to meet his clients. And that's why he was driving back from Wollongong, and he obviously stopped there for lunch, and that's why this all happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we believed that wholeheartedly until Justine's book. And that's what we told the police our recount was of his movements. I don't know if someone had said that to protect her, but I believe that there was a lot of investigation into that actual story, but we didn't know that there was another story.
Which was that his meetings were on the North Shore that day.
Correct. And that he didn't go to work. He didn't go to work.
Would be unusual for Nigel if he was taking a personal day off to not tell Kathleen that that's what was happening. They followed their absolutely normal morning routine that day.
Correct.
He was dressed in his business attire when he was found, so it would appear that he had all intention of heading to work.
Yes, and that was another thing. Did he meet someone and they set him up, or they, did something? There's so many, as I say, it's the what ifs. It's constant what ifs. And it's some of my family have gone to the grave not knowing this little tidbit about he'd been seen with a woman. As I say, though, and eventually I got Kathleen to say, that doesn't matter.
It doesn't, and there was only
a mistake on his part for one day of his life, and obviously it's the worst mistake he may have ever made. But it doesn't change your relationship with him. It doesn't change he was a good person. It doesn't change that no one should be murdered, and it doesn't change the fact that he wasn't just murdered, he was absolutely mutilated, which is sick.
The theory that was put forward in regard to Lisa, and we're calling her Lisa because there was a piece of paper found with a phone number with the name Lisa on it. Yep. We don't actually know that the woman he was spotted with was Lisa.
No.
But that was just one theory where they suggested that perhaps he may have been seeing someone else. But there are also a million different possibilities. That woman could have been someone whose car had broken down in the park and he'd given a lift to meet someone else. It was just one theory that's been put forward and kind of run with, which gave them a basis to look for evidence. But it doesn't necessarily mean it was the right theory either, because they've never been able to track down Lisa. They did trace the phone number to a home, but there was never a Lisa at that address.
No, and it wasn't really followed up any further than that.
And given that Nigel was a salesman, it doesn't mean that Lisa is not somebody that he made a possible sales contact with, and she's not, in fact, the woman who was spotted with him in the park that day.
That's right. It's just a piece of paper.
We
have no idea.
the existence of this Lisa is only one of the roadblocks that have been a challenge as the Cold Case Investigation Unit has looked into this. What are some of the other barriers that they've faced during their time when they reopened this investigation?
One of the things they wanted from the family was Nigel had a very expensive watch, and they felt that they may have been able to get DNA off that watch because he would have been dragged by his arm because the watch was still on him.
Mm-hmm.
And my Auntie Kathy had given it to her brother, and her brother had worn it for many years. And so then they didn't think that was a viable option. The fact that, he had been so many years wearing the watch, and the watch had been cleaned and bands changed and all sorts of things. So that was out. Another thing that was a problem is there's been evidence lost. For instance, really vital piece of evidence is the bullet. They can't find it. Sutherland Police Station did move, and they think that it may have been mixed up with something, discarded, thrown out. They're not sure. That's a vital piece of evidence, and it's missing.
So after all of those years, you guys then made contact with a really passionate young police officer who believed that this case was solvable and the things that he needed weren't available to him.
Correct. In ruling out theories, Kathleen always she got so many sympathy cards, and we gave those all over to the police because there was a, little thought that there could have been a serial killer, and that maybe that, they had written to her and they were looking at all the people who sent sympathy cards. And there were lots and lots of things, but everything he could have used, like the really big stuff, is not there.
Yeah. So they've been fighting an uphill battle from day one.
Yeah.
And you guys have been the victims of that because you haven't received any of the answers that you've needed.
No. Now, one of the other things that I should tell you was we've now been struck with a bit of an ineffective police department, cold case department, because when they did those interviews, those rounds of interviews and caused someone to be rattled, one of the people that they'd interviewed actually was on a job site, and he spoke to my nephew. Now, my nephew was absolutely shocked and pretended he didn't know anything about Nigel, because this man said, he goes, what's wrong with you? And he goes, the police have interviewed me about this murder from blah, blah. And so my sister immediately rang Cold Cases, explained that her son was on a job site with this person and that this person was talking to people and maybe you should look at this person. And she didn't even get a phone call back.
So the police were still at that time obviously interviewing people that they suspected could have information or may have been involved.
Yeah.
But none of that information was being passed on to you guys.
No. I went and I did an appeal because they had decided to increase the reward money.
This was
for
in
Nigel
2011?
Correct.
Yes.
And they thought that by increasing the reward money, they may get somebody who was a bit desperate for money to speak. They were really hopeful that that would happen. Well, unfortunately, on the same day, overseas, the Japanese tsunami hit. And so our story that was meant to be really the headline story actually then became like a little byline at the end of the news. All the newspapers turned up, all the television stations turned up for the interview and for the, to talk about the reward money. Yeah, the appeal for someone to come forward. And unfortunately, it sort of went nowhere. And that's the very last day we've heard from the police.
And that was 2011.
Mm-hmm. We've never heard another word since. And as I say, my sister rang after that, and after that they had obviously, interviewed someone and didn't even get a phone call back.
Does the reward still stand for information, Narelle?
Yes, I believe there's a $200,000 reward for information.
That leads to the conviction.
Correct.
Yeah. The fact that there has been a person's name and phone number found, there has been an anonymous phone call to Crime Stoppers. There are people out there who still hold vital information that could help police solve this case.
Mm-hmm. And all it would take was one person maybe from your listeners talking about this case, sharing it to someone, and someone might jog a memory and say, hold on, I was at a party once and such talked about this. You never know. You just never know who's listening.
And time does change things for people.
Correct. Alliances die. People lose their fear of people, things that they might have held over them. People's consciences might finally go, I can't live with this secret. We live every day with, am I talking to a murderer? Stuart particularly, he has said in one of the only interviews he did, I never know when I say hello to someone if I'm shaking hands with someone who may have killed my father. I have no idea. He has that mindset every day.
It's such
every single day.
a difficult way to live your
Yep.
life.
Yep. Yep. I can't honestly tell you, and it's the same for, I imagine, people who have got missing people. Every week, now I've had this since this is 50 years of me thinking this. Every week I have thoughts about Nigel. Every week. My mum passed away last year, so she desperately wanted it solved for Kathy. Kathleen's still alive, but not in great health. And it would just be so wonderful to say, hey, they got someone. Doesn't matter how old these people are, like they would be getting on in age. Doesn't matter how old they are. They did something terrible. Who's to say that the day that the mind doesn't snap and they do something again horrendous? If you can do that to someone, you're certainly capable of injuring or hurting another person without another thought about it.
And even if those people have gone, if they have passed away, for Kathy to know why
Yes.
and how
Yes.
means that for the first time in 50 years, she can understand. And I don't pretend that this would bring her closure or lessen her pain in any way, but to have an understanding of why this occurred would mean so
Correct.
much to her.
I hate the word closure because I don't think there is ever any closure.
No.
I think you can come to terms with things much better if you could understand things.
Mm-hmm.
And if the people have passed away, if they've told someone, look, what have you got to lose by coming forward and just telling us, hey, this is what happened and this is what they said. And yes, they definitely did it. That would be great.
There is everything to gain from that because it means that a group of people who love someone so dearly get the answers that they've been waiting for 50 years.
Yep, that's right. That's right. So Stuart is a father and a grandfather now, and his children didn't know until they were adults any of this because he couldn't talk to them about it. Eventually they know and they understand now, and it gives them a better understanding of him. And I would love that for him. I would just love that for him.
Just to know even that the next person that he meets on the street and shakes their hand is not the person that killed his father.
He doesn't have to be worried anymore.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be worried anymore.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be worried anymore.
It would be life-changing for him.
Yep, that's right. That's right. It would be like a miracle at this point.
Yeah. Have you
But miracles happen.
They can and they absolutely do. Have you got any personal theories, Narelle, on what you think may have happened with all of the information that you've learned over the years?
Well, I really think that the police definitely have an idea of who they think did it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely got that on the day that we did the appeal. I really think they feel like they know who did it. It's just a matter of linking them to it, and that's the hard thing. They
And
need
it can
that
be
one
the
person,
smallest piece of evidence.
and all they need just one person to come forward and say, hey, I can't live with this anymore.
Yeah.
We did this.
What are some
did this.
other ways that the general public can help? Because I can't imagine anyone listening to you speak today not walking away from this and thinking, I can't imagine what that would be like for those people. So outside of providing information to Crime Stoppers, what are some ways that the general public can help with keeping this story out there for you guys?
It's not a very pleasant subject, but maybe when you're out having lunch with your friends, tell them, listen to your podcast. Then they can tell their 10 friends to listen to your podcast. And maybe we get Nigel's name back out there. Maybe the police, someone from the police listens, or maybe someone's got a friend who's a policeman who they might say, hey, what are you doing for this family? Like no one's contacted them since the appeal in 2011. You know, maybe that's a way. I mean, I appreciate the fact that you're even doing it. If nothing else comes from this, you guys get a better understanding of Nigel, what he meant to his family and loved ones and friends. And you also are with us on his 50 years anniversary of his murder, and something that should never have happened.
And a big reason why I chose to start this year, because this will be the first episode for 2025, was that if nothing comes of it, we are remembering a man who meant a lot to a lot of people.
That's correct. And if ever anybody's at Sutherland, go into the Police Citizens Boys Club and there's plaque on the wall and you can read about what he did, because he didn't just, he taught the pipes up there and he also helped with other things up at the Police Boys Club. He worked in the canteen and he tried to give back to the community. And, you know, the footage of his funeral was heartbreaking. It had Stuart marching in the band and all those people who came out, the band. The streets were lined from the Police Boys Club to the Sutherland Cemetery with people.
Yeah. And those band members protected Stuart on that day.
Correct. They formed ranks around him. They wanted him to have it as normal as he could be.
Yeah.
And his normal was playing as part of that band.
Yeah. But the media at the time was ferocious in trying to get that footage. Yeah.
Yes. Once that happened, the funeral happened, that these days someone gets murdered, it's on the television for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and this lead and that lead and this person's, you know, like if they think someone's been murdered and they're missing, it's big coverage.
Yeah.
There's hardly anything in the newspapers, hardly anything on the television. It only went for like literally a few days.
I know.
Up until the funeral.
Part of the reason why I reached out to you, because outside of Justine's work on this case, there are very small amounts of articles that we can get our hands on to learn about Nigel and his life and the case and the evidence. Some of them are conflicting in information, and that's what led me to reach out to you in the beginning. But when there is so much information out there available about current things, and I think it took me about 2 hours to even find a photograph of Nigel.
Yep. When somebody found a photo of him and put it in the paper, he didn't have his glasses on, and Kathleen was really worried that no one would recognise him because he wore very thick rimmed black glasses. So very quickly we made sure we found another photo and got it out there. Yeah. So there would be two photos, one of him without glasses. I think he's holding my brother as a baby. And then the next photo is him with his glasses on.
Yeah. It's such a heart-wrenching case, Narelle, and I cannot begin to express my gratitude for your willingness to come and chat with us today. I hope beyond hope that Kathleen gets the answers that she needs, and that Stuart and yourself and your extended family one day will find the piece of the puzzle that will bring you some rest, where you guys can have the understanding that you have been looking for such a long time.
It would be nice to have our minds quieted for just a week. It would be very nice. But I really appreciate you bringing it to light again. And I will never stop, whilst ever I have breath, I'll never stop trying to get answers for the family. I don't know how else to do it, but I will not stop, because I would love to get some answers. And I think that for particularly Kathy and Stuart, They deserve to have that. They deserve to have what's left of their lives to live with some sort of normality, as saying, these people got caught, we know why, and just have just a moment of normality for however long that they have left in their lives.
Thanks, Narelle, for allowing us to be a part of that.
No problem. Thank you so much, Shannon.
If you or someone you know has any information in relation to the murder of Nigel McAree or any crime, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, you can call Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000 or report online at newsouthwales.crimestoppers.com.au. Information can be reported anonymously, and even something small could provide the missing link that could bring answers to family members of victims. I would again like to extend my gratitude to Narelle for agreeing to speak with us today. Her determination, drive and hope is inspiring, not just to me, but I am sure to many, including the members of her family and other families who have faced a life of questions without answers as to why and where the deaths and disappearances of the people they loved most have left a gaping wound in the spaces where love existed.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of If These Trees Could Talk. If you would like to access more about the places or information included in today's topic, please visit our website ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. If you would like to follow us on our adventures, check us out on Facebook or Insta. Our creative writer is Shannon Walters, and our podcast is produced at Bellevue Studio in the Hunter Valley with audio production by Megan Anderson. We love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review, and if you would like to hear more, please subscribe. We look forward to you joining us for our next adventure.